Okay, I'm gonna test my voice here and see if I have echo.
Okay. Testing.
Okay, so I don't have an echo.
Okay. Yeah, I like. Huh. Okay. All right. Let's hopefully there won't be an issue this time around.
Sweet.
Alrighty. Well, we are live. We'll come into you for officially week 1 of the anime podcast. The second week, if you're including our preseason show. And yeah, we're here to essentially discuss all of the seasonal animes that have come out for spring 2021. Yours truly, Manatsu and I, we have decided to watch almost every single anime that came out, spring season anime that has come out. Watch the first episode specifically. For this episode, we are only going to be talking about the first episodes for most of these shows, and that will be what is discussed. But we watched each one of them, gave them a rating out of 10, and yeah, we're here to just share our initial thoughts.
Yeah. So we are watching the non-sequels. If you didn't catch our podcast last week, and we're looking at 36 shows, but one of the shows is not premiering until 3 weeks from now, and so we, in the past week, individually have watched 35 episodes. The first episodes for each show. So yeah, I think we can get started here.
Alrighty.
So just a recap of the rules for anyone who's new here. We're watching 35 shows, or we watched 35 shows, and we actually kind of tweaked the format here. Last week we mentioned how we were just dropping one at a time, and potentially not dropping anything for the first 3 weeks, but then we realized how much episodes there were, and there's already not a lot of episodes that were nice, and so instead, we're going to drop 4. We're going to drop 2 each this week, and we're going to drop 2 each next week. And every week after that, we'll be just dropping 2. So today, we're talking about 35 shows, dropping 4. And then the week after, we'll have 31 shows, dropping 4. And then week 3 is when Yasuke would be added. And so that's why you'll see instead of going from 27 shows to 25, it goes to 26 because we'll be adding Yasuke. Again, we keep doing this till the last week, week 12, where we have 10 shows left. And we'll see what the top 8 are. We each have perks available to use anytime in the season. We each have 1 drop, so we can just drop an additional show that we want to, and save a show in case the other person dropped a show that we enjoy.
Yeah, so we get essentially one force drop and 1 save from dropping that we each get to use throughout the season. So yeah.
So yeah, as a reminder again, we're not going to be talking about Yasuke until 3 weeks from now. So the way we're going to discuss this is we realized last week that we talked individually about every single episode. We would take 3 hours, and I don't know if we have the energy to do a 3-hour podcast or if you guys have the energy to listen to a 3-hour podcast. So we're going to break the animes up into a top, middle, bottom section. So the top shows of the week, the bottom shows the week, the middle, and we're going to focus mostly on the top and bottom. We'll go through the mid really quickly,
Okay.
But we're going to focus our attention on the top shows and the bottom shows. And the shows that we are specifically dropping have to be from this bottom tier. So it just can't be like some rando top because we want to trill. It's just only the bottom shows.
Yeah, essentially, it has to have gotten a bad rating. We can't just, randomly drop one. Alrighty.
So we're going to move into the top 10. We're sectioning off with the way it works. We had a lot of ties, and so we initially wanted just to discuss the top 8 and bottom 8. But because of ties, it's going to be the top 10 and bottom 10. So these are the top 10 shows this week. To, I think, none of our surprise, number 1 is Those Snow White Notes. We each, I think, gave them the highest score, if I recall correctly.
This was each of us gave it essentially the highest scores that we gave for the entire, our entire reviews. Keep in mind that technically it is out of 10, but I guess what's more important is the score relative to the rest of them, which is reflected in the rolling average essentially. And so yeah, I had a 9 that was just way above and beyond what the average score was. Manatsu gave it a 7.5, and that averages out to 8.25. And this one by a pretty, I think this is actually the largest margin, one of the largest margins, not the largest margins between
shows?
two. Yeah,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, yes, it's pretty large. Yeah, those Snow White notes. I remember the trailer being kind of interesting, but it didn't show too much. That being said, typically, I feel like even before I start watching the episode, when an anime has a very, shall I say, relatively more singular focus that they put the show around and start building elements around it, it tends to have a pretty strong, I guess, shall I say, setup. And I'm not gonna lie, this show, man, slice of life. And it's almost, shall you say, almost like a prototypical setup of, oh hey, main character meets some tragedy, has to go find soul search and find their own meaning. But man, just from both like a audio and visual perspective, did a lot in one show, and I was honestly just so excited. I still remember this was one of the shows where both of us essentially told each other, man, we're having a really hard time not just pressing go next and just watch the next episode just because of, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the OP and ED, I mean, obviously it's a music anime, but the
Yeah.
OP and ED were really, really good. This reminds me a lot of Kono Otetomare, which was the song, the anime that I was comparing this to, and I
Okay.
think it delivered pretty well.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, they're
Yeah.
starting off really strong at number 1.
Yeah, starting off really strong. I'd say for the listeners or the viewers, if you are somebody who enjoys the slice of life genre, even to just any degree, if you're looking for something that kind of has more of an emotional component to it, this is definitely I would recommend. Like I said, did a lot in one episode, and obviously, we still have plenty of episodes left, and we'll see how it goes. But man, it started off strong. It didn't feel like it was all over the place. Like relatively, like if you were to map out like the literary elements of what happened, sure, didn't have that many things that happened, but each like kind of event or thing that they focused on, I felt like it was really, really well executed. And by the time you kind of get to the episode's climax, like, yeah, it's just such a treat. Amazing, amazing.
Yeah, the moment I remembered from this was there's a moment of silence that happened towards the climax
Yeah.
of the show that I thought was used very well. And obviously, it's
Oh
because
man.
it's a music
Yeah.
anime that they did that.
Hmm.
And so it'll be interesting to see where the show goes.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely super good. Would recommend.
All right, number 2 we have Vivi, Fluoride Ice song. I give it a score of 7. You gave it a score of 8, and so it is not tied with anything. It is at second place.
Yeah.
Does this come as a shocker to you?
This did kind of come as a shocker, I guess, just based on the trailers we watched. I know that this was one of the ones we flagged as saying like, oh, like it has like a pretty nice potential.
Yeah.
And actually the way I kind of thought it would have really amazing potential was specifically kind of like, oh, like like singing supposed to mean something like super special, but actually it didn't even necessarily take on like a super mystic angle. And that being said, even though it doesn't have like a mystical element to almost kind of like hard iron in that little symbolism and parallels, like it ends up just through the story essentially, you have a girl, specifically an android girl, who's, really her primary mission is just that she wants to sing, and that
Wait,
simple.
so let's backtrack there. So, well, obviously, to all the viewers and listeners, this podcast is not going to be spoiler free. And so, if you want to watch the shows or
Yeah.
just want to see the ratings, just mute and then look at the ratings. But yeah, but before you said they had a singular goal, it's because part of the plot is androids could not, or AIs and robots couldn't handle multi-functions, and so they're simple machines, and so they only have one goal, and so her programmed one goal is to sing to the audience.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be, and it's essentially, it's kind of like a symbolism of, like joy, right? It's to bring joy, right? It's like the mission is to sing to bring joy, and that gets layered very well into actually like a pretty interesting setup where essentially, not to spoil too much of it, she needs to save the world, right? And it really, the story does a pretty good job of aligning this idea that like humanity and joy are things that are like they're part of the central what it means to be a human, right? It's worth what's worth protecting in humans, and that's like I said, it's just the first episode, and so there is still a lot of story to go, but damn, this was exciting. I think that the premise was set up interestingly enough, and I think the characters and yeah, animation was pretty good too.
I
Yeah,
did want to point out the that intro timer. Did you recognize that, the intro timer?
I did not recognize this intro
So,
timer.
like at the beginning of the show, there's a timer that occurs when the scientist decides to send, because it's like time. There's a time loop involved, right? Where
Yeah.
the researcher puts in information 100 years back to prevent this
Mm-hmm.
catastrophe. The moment he puts that thing on the top left corner of the screen of the episode, there's a timer and a position tracker, and there's
Oh.
a time and place where the
Uh-huh.
information gets relayed. And if you're paying attention, the moment it hits that time and coordinate, that's when Vivi gets all the information.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
So
Well.
I thought that
Okay.
was
Yeah.
a real neat little trick.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it does details. I guess to hop off of that, does details really well. I think that it just through the animations, kind of just through the pacing and all that, it does a pretty good job of kind of immersing you into this, futuristic society. And yeah, I mean, it just feels like a treat. It's definitely does the job of immersion. I think that once again, like I said, the setup of the story ends up being pretty solid, and so there's just a lot of potential. I thought that even for opening, I would generally say for specifically for anime openings, I think, and correct me if you have a different perspective, but usually even for a lot of animes that I end up liking, the first episodes end up being kind of like it's like okay, and then it kind of like ramps up and like kind of gets better. Whereas and the only reason I bring that up is because if you were to look at Western shows, basically because a lot of shows have to quote unquote earn the pilot, they sometimes just toss all the amazing juice into the first episode, whereas that's not the case in Japan. And so
Yeah.
usually
For sure.
animes, I would say more often than not, they kind of start off a little bit like like it's okay, and like don't get, and like so some of the shows that we talk about, including some of the shows that didn't end up making to the top 10, still could end up being like amazing shows. Just kind of if as they ramp up, I will say this one already started off on like quite an intriguing note, and yeah, very very solid.
Yeah. Coming in number 3 is 86 by A1 Pictures. I gave it a 6.5. You gave it a 7. This one had a lot of hype going into it, and I think it did pretty well with the hype.
Yeah.
Premise is pretty interesting. Okay. Premise is definitely overused. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of animes where the central plot is some sort of war, and for
Yeah.
whatever reasons, it's kids that are fighting.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a very almost a little. It's like it's a very. It's like Japan's version of like the young adult dystopian future type of spin. Like it happens a lot.
Yeah, so it's used a lot, and I feel
Yeah.
like there's one of these shows like every other season. But I think what's nice about this one is that they already like out the gate already tells you what the mystery is like about
Yeah.
the 86 districts.
Yeah.
Now that out's the way, they can kind of explore what's happening here.
Yeah. I will say that it's as per most of these dystopian shows, there's always some sort of central, shall I say, like moral quandary that people just kind of have to like navigate. And I think that with this show, it's not. I won't lie and say that it's like so unique. I've never thought of it, but I do think that just even like I said, once again, referring back to the whole first episode thing, even for a first episode, I think that it sets up the premise interestingly enough to the point where, like I said, like it does very well with essentially the prototypical setting and all that. Like I think it did a very good job with it.
Yeah, and it's animated quite nicely. I
Yeah.
think,
Oh yeah.
if anything, I'd rather like this show. I don't think it does anything spectacular, but there's no obvious signs of bad animation. Like for
Yeah.
me, I look for still shots. I look for those like really weird background characters. Like if they're not in the
Yeah.
focus, they're like
Yeah.
weirdly drawn because
Yeah.
they don't have time. This show, I don't think had that.
Yeah. Did definitely looked very clean, very crisp. It was pretty enjoyable. Yeah.
Okay, so starting with this show, we have a humongous tie. So you'll see a lot of number fours. But the first number four for, and I'm just doing this alphabetically so that there's
Yes.
no like bias at all.
Yeah.
It's gonna be "Don't Toy with Me, Miss Nagatoro" by Telecom Animation Film. I gave it a 5.5. You gave it a 6, so a rolling average of 5.75. What do you think about the show?
Yeah. I think that this is you're gonna have to. I'm so bad with remembering show titles. But you're gonna have to. What was the show that I was talking about last week where it's like a girl that teases
Oh,
boys that they're really young.
"Don't Tease Me," Takaki-san.
Yeah. So
I
this
think
this
that might
one,
be.
it kind of that's kind of what I expected going into this. I will say this one is a little bit more aggressive than that show. A little bit is kind of understated. That being said, though, I do think that with the aggressiveness, it does balance out some interesting character development setups. I won't say that like this is just completely void of kind of, shall I say, even like a little bit of like Japanese ecchi tropes or that type of stuff. Like it's not super ecchi, but at the same time, like I said, it's definitely a little bit aggressive. But I will say that it kind of earns the characters almost, shall I say, like the characters are all really strong. Essentially, they're all very aggressive. When I say aggressive, when obviously Miss Nagatoro is really aggressive in her teasing and her toying, and in terms of the male protagonist is also very aggressively, shall I say, shy, very aggressively, just like beta, for lack of a better way to say it, right? But I do think that almost kind of like the almost the character, like even though the characters are a little bit closer to characterizations, I do think that they've balanced kind of enough substance, and kind of almost like showing of like, oh, like this is why they are the way that they are, or slash like put in a little bit more motivational things that they can kind of build up and make it almost like, essentially they give you enough material to kind of buy into these, shall I say, extremely vibrant characters. So I will say that originally, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think last week I wasn't like super optimistic on it, and
No.
I ended up turning, like I said, like I do think that the characterization part, I actually, in my opinion, I did kind of like hit that on the nose, but I do think that they did a pretty good job, like I said, even though these characters are a little bit over the top. I do think that there's enough in there to
Yeah,
kind of
I think
buy.
that teasing
Yeah.
is a little bit extra, right? I
Yeah.
think teasing to the point
Yeah.
of crying is like, do I really like this character anymore?
Yeah.
But I do think that the voice acting is great,
Yeah.
on both sides, and the animation is quite nice as well.
Yeah.
So we'll see if it's something that makes sense. Like right now, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, how can I forgot this senpai? I forgot his
Yeah.
actual name. How
Yeah.
can you tolerate her?
Yeah.
Because at the end, they're like all chummy with each other. So we'll
Yeah.
see if I can still believe that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, like I mean, like I think, like on the topic of just like way too, it's not way too over the top, but they're definitely kind of a little bit approaching the over the top. I don't think that is necessarily bad, right? You have plenty of movies with very eccentric characters. I think that with this show, what it did surprise me about it was I just felt like there was kind of like they did good enough of a job to explore, at least for me, for a first episode, to be like, that's decent enough. I want to see where it goes. Obviously, no guarantees,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, we'll see how they deal with pacing. Because I don't want just this teasing back and forth for every episode. There has to be some sort of some growth. So I think like
Yeah.
episode 2 and 3 sure get away with it, but by episode 4, I'm hoping to
Yeah.
see some growth in their relationship.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty.
All right, so number 4 as well. Farewell, My Dear Kramer. Same scores across the board. This show, I mean, I'm a big fan of slice of life and
Okay.
sports, so I
Hmm.
quite like the show.
Hmm.
I enjoyed it. Uh, it's a great way to introduce a lot of the characters. And if you look at the poster, right, you see like just a lot of characters, and I think that's
Yeah.
the hard part, balancing
Hmm.
each character's story.
Hmm.
But in terms of like the personalities and the differences, I think they nailed it pretty well.
Yeah. I will say, once again, gonna repeat this very often as kind of a disclaimer. I'm usually the type of person that doesn't really like sports animes for two reasons. Number one, usually they're kind of immersion breaking if I happen to be like an avid viewer of said sport. With this one, I will say it's pretty. There isn't anything too crazy going on. Like the stuff that they're talking about makes sense essentially for middle school girls. Like it's like, oh, like that's the type of athleticism they have. This is probably the stuff they focus on. These are the type of things like it's all like pretty realistic. And so there isn't anything immersion breaking about it. Secondly, I will say that to mirror what Minatsu was talking about, I think that sports, even though this is sports animes, and sometimes I feel like the sports aspect of it, if they go too deep into kind of like the, shall I say, like, oh, the coolness of what they're pulling off, sometimes it kind of detracts from the characters, and it's just kind of like, oh, look at
Mhm.
how high this, look at like how fast this guy is or whatever. But this show does a very good job, at least within just with the first episode already, has seemingly done a pretty good job at developing kind of like, okay, this is what drives this character. This is, the kind of the temperaments, like well, I can't say all, we don't know this like all the way, but like some of what drives a certain character, like, like these are kind of like why they're here and all that type of stuff. Like I think that they did a very good job at developing the characters. And I think that that's a pretty, I'll admit that I haven't watched a ton of sports animes, but from the sports animes that I've watched, I feel like this one, at least just character development wise, seemed to do like a very good job. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I do want to point out, I still don't know. Like, I think one of the mysteries of this show is the title.
Yeah.
Because I have no idea who Kramer is, and I don't think they
Yeah.
mentioned in the first
I
episode Kramer.
yeah,
So,
I don't think so. There is a farewell component. Essentially, the show actually starts off with essentially a time. I guess okay. So the show essentially has a scene. It starts off with a scene that's like 10ish years after the rest of the show's scenes. Essentially, it's kind of like here's something, and then they flash back like 10 years forward to kind of like how they all became soccer players. Maybe as something like the farewell has something to do with that. Like it's kind of like a melodramatic like
oh, I
opening
didn't realize there
sequence.
was a flashback.
Well, it's kind of like no, it's so essentially the opening scene is of when I'm assuming it's the girl in the very middle of the poster when she's an adult playing for the Olympic soccer team, and
Oh,
she
really?
goes,
I thought, she becomes a coach. She becomes the coach at the end of the episode.
"Are you? No, I'm pretty sure.
Like the ending of the remember the ending of the first episode is that they
Yeah.
got an former Olympic player to be a coach.
Oh, is that what it
Uh,
is?
yeah,
Maybe.
there's no
Okay, maybe.
flashback.
Okay, maybe that's what it was. Okay. Well, in that case, we have absolutely no idea
Yeah,
what the
I have
farewell
no
is.
clue.
Okay.
I think
Um,
we'll see. And I don't think Kramer the name has anything to do with soccer or like
not
Japanese soccer
not
for that
yeah.
matter.
At least yeah. Not from my understanding.
Yeah.
I don't remember Kramer being a very famous.
All right, so number 4 as well, Full Dive. This Ultimate Next Gen Full Dive RPG is even shittier than real life. Same scores across the board, and man, was this a surprise?
Yeah. I think there was a level of s- very big skepticism from both of us yesterday. Not yesterday, last week, where essentially we're like, okay, like to play to this idea of like truly the escapism, for. I'm just being a little bit crass here, but it's like for no life losers who want to join a different world, like a video game world,
Yeah.
and like they're trying to be like, oh yo, like this is more realistic, yo, and then still include a big bunch of bullshit in there, and they kind of be like, haha, it's so shitty, look at that, haha, yay, Yasuke's. That was not what happened, at least in the first
Oh,
episode. It was
it was pretty enjoyable.
yeah, I will say that it's shitty things actually kind of happened. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's like actually happened. And no, I don't mean like shitty as in like, oh my gosh, I have too many women following me, I don't know what to do with them. Like I'm talking like it's like actually unfortunate things happen, and that was a surprise. I was like, oh
Hmm.
crap, like yeah, I'll admit that yeah, like I just had very low expectations coming into it, and I thought that it would just kind of be like a, like I said, almost like a weird self justification of the genre, but yeah, I think just true to the title, it's interesting in that this is the first one where like there has been some real consequences that seem like they're not like just like it's almost okay. Like I will say for plenty of isekais, even momentous occasions, you as a viewer just know that like essentially the MC is shielded from anything super bad actually happening to them, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's like
Even
I became a
Konosuba.
yeah, like even I mean Konosuba. Okay, I'll give that one a little bit of a pass because it's like oh, it's supposed to kind of be like poking fun at the genre. But even let's say like oh, like some of the better ones that say like oh, I became a slime,
Mm.
like that one or like Overlord. Like no matter how bad like or like how like crazy of something that happens, like you just know when you're watching like psh, nothing's gonna happen. It's whatever.
Yeah.
This is the first show that's giving me a vibe where it's just like oh like actions have consequences, and just like the title says is like like an alternate life with consequences will still have consequences, and so yeah like
Yeah. I want to see if they flip it. So like, so one
yeah
of the more popular isekais is Shield Hero.
yeah
And so at the beginning, he's like, in a shitty situation, and he has a useless shield as a weapon. But
yeah
then you realize that his shield is like
it's
one of the
actually super
biggest,
OP.
strongest
Yeah.
weapons.
Mm.
So I'm wondering if they're gonna take the same route, if like he all of a sudden gets overpowered for
Yeah,
whatever reason, or if it's just a crappy
actually
life.
just
And I
just
and I
actually
think that's
sticks.
the charm of this show. He's just in
Yeah.
a crappy situation.
Yeah, like at the very beginning, like he like thinks like like it's typical like I said like it's it's season one SAO like Kirito level of bullshit where it's just like oh like you run and you're just like I'm a god like there's literally none of that here like it's just actually like he's a normal ass dude and some bad things happen and man they have consequences and like
Yeah,
shit
and it's not like it's a full blown isekai, right?
yeah
Because he's in the VMO RPG
yeah so he's not
game.
actually so he doesn't actually like get killed and then get
Or-
sent to like a new realm or whatever like this is still like a VR right it's just like it's a dive RPG and the reason why it's shittier than real life is because he's trying to escape from real life but yeah I mean anyways like I said definitely surpassed my expectations we will see how the show goes I do think that if they kind of had a nice opening show and then he just becomes like a god the second episode
Yeah,
and
it
starts to
defeats the
teeter out it's
purpose.
like yeah kind of defeats the purpose but if they do continue on this road of shall I say literally no okay seeming less plot armor than usual isekais it will be kind of enjoyable to
Hmm.
watch all right.
All right, so next one up, also tied at number 4, is Korikima by Nomad. Again, same scores across the board.
Yeah. I will say this one is I will put out kind of like a little disclaimer slash a note. This is definitely some boundary erasing stuff.
Yeah.
I'll just say it straight right off the bat, like not a very SJW show. But I will say that even despite, shall I say, almost like a little bit the kind of insult fantasy potential that it sets up like a little bit, even with that going against it, it still ends
I'm
up
surprised that
being
you mentioned that because
yeah.
I didn't feel any tones of.
Well, and so that's okay. So the idea, the basic premise, right, is that there's a super rich guy that gets into a situation with a girl, and now he's just madly in love with the girl, and he's like, oh, like since I'm a Chad, therefore you should automatically love me, right? Like that type of like that's kind of like the original. That's a very 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 original vibe that's presented in like the first like like 5 to 6ish minutes. The
Hmm.
show actually does balance it out pretty well because she ends up not being a pushover. It's not like shall I say like almost like a Sakura level of just like oh like you suck I'm just gonna punch the shit out of you like no I'm saying that like she's actually like like emotionally like very resilient. There's like a nice balancing out essentially like there ends up being like a bearable balance even though the dude is like I said just some kind of like level of like oh like because I'm good looking and I'm rich, therefore you must worship me, like type of thing. Like it does balance it out. And so it ends up, like I said, like even though there is some, shall I say, some lack of boundaries slash, like potentially a little bit of red flags if you're to look at it from an SJW angle, it still ends up, the story still ends up being like decent enough to the point where, yeah, I mean, it made it into our top 10 shows for a reason. I think the animations looked really nice. The characters, even though, like I said, like there was a notable lack of boundaries sometimes, but I do think that the characters, even with that being said, are pretty decently developed. Just like, I guess, for the amount of development that you can do within one episode of an anime, like it still ended up being decent. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so the basic premise here is just he has been a womanizer. He's been able to get all the girls, and then finally finds the one that
Yeah.
rejects him. And I think it's a premise that a lot of other shows use.
Yeah.
And I think the interactions are pretty funny. I found it funny. I thought the animations
Mm-hmm.
were good too.
Yeah.
It's just really weird that the author had to like make her in
Yeah.
high school. Like
Yeah.
literally, you could have the same effect with her being in college, and it'd still be funny. The age
Yeah.
gap would still be funny.
Yeah, but it's like essentially
Um,
the dude is a full blown professional. I mean, okay, even if you were to account for some family nepotism, dude has to be like at least be like in his like late 20s, right? That's kind of like what the show suggests. Like he's like probably in his
Oh,
late
really?
20s.
I was thinking
Okay,
like 25,
okay,
26,
yeah,
but
25,
yeah.
26, yeah. Like so he's like 25, 26 ish. Like he's been a professional for some time essentially, and yeah, the girl's still in high school, and I do think that this is kind of just like a um it does seem like it's something that Japanese media and especially anime tends to not taboo as much as us in the like I guess what the Western perspective would. And so to be fair, this type of premise of way older guy and high school girl isn't like completely unheard of. I will
Yeah.
say though that this is one of the ones where like it's like what Manasu said, like you could have achieved the exact same effect without it. There are some, right? Like there is one show that I don't know if it actually made it all the way down to the bottom, but like let's see. But
We'll save it for later. We'll
yeah,
save it for
we'll
later.
save it later, but like yeah, exactly. This one doesn't hinge, like the whole premise doesn't hinge on her being a high schooler and him being
Yeah, it really
a
doesn't.
lot older. And so yeah, like I said, like it's a little bit kind of like wah wah wah, but like I said, it's like even despite all of that going into it, it still did a pretty good job of telling this story. And like yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes to premises like these, it
Yeah.
depends how cringy I feel.
Yeah. And
And I
like
didn't feel too cringy, at
yeah.
least compared to like the other episodes.
Yeah, like I said, like there's kind of some red flags to be thrown, but it's like I said, I do think it is a balance of the fact that the girl's strong, and once again, not necessarily just in like a Sakura like explosive temper strong, but rather like she like has a very like a fleshed out perspective on who she wants to be, what she thinks like how she thinks the world should be, and so it ends up balancing out like the, shall I say, the over the topness of the dude, and so yeah, pretty easy. All right.
All right, Odd Taxi. Number 4, same scores across the board. I think all the number 4 here have the same score across the board.
Yeah.
So this one was, I mean, mixed expectations because when it comes to animals as main characters, it's always
Yeah.
iffy. But I always
Yeah.
I have better expectations of it ever since Beastars was a
Okay.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
This show is pretty good. I like
Yeah.
the mystery. The whole there's a lot of things going. I think of all the first episodes, this show has the most plot lines. In my
Yes,
opinion.
like if you were to draw out like okay, like literary events and how they could potentially connect to each other slash like just like things in general. Like if you were to do a map, I think this one would have the most complex map. Just starting
Yeah,
off from
there's
episode
so
one.
many things. So
Yeah.
there's the corrupt police.
Yeah.
There is the MC taking care of a runaway.
Yeah.
There is the nurse that is stealing drugs.
Yeah.
And that's I think the big 3 premise right now. And there's
Yeah.
there's a lot of undertones of other things going on too.
Yeah.
So not exactly sure what the main character. I mean, the main character is the walrus dude in the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah.
So we'll see. This show I feel like hinges a lot on not telling,
Yeah.
and just showing.
Yeah. I will say this one is, in my opinion, out of all the shows we watch, I think has the sharpest dialogue. And and this is very surprising to me because generally speaking, and I think that this was just a little bit of a tangent, but you'll see why I said this. So when Hugh Laurie was interviewed for House, and House was a really big show when it was a House MD, he was surprised that it had a very large international presence because he was like, oh, like for a show that focuses this much on talking and dialogue and kind of like that's kind of like the feature of the show. He was very surprised that it translated that well into other languages, which is why he was surprised. This one is the same thing where I was like, okay, it's even though it's in Japanese and it's in a language that I don't understand and I have to read the subtitles, like I said, the dialogue still ended up being incredibly sharp. Like I felt like it was one of those things where it's like, oh, like the dialogue was like, it was very witty, it was sharp, like it was just very very well written. Like I think like just the dialogue allowed a lot of these characters to get a lot of their inner turmoil / like kind of their viewpoints like just out there with like not too many lines. Like I said, like I did definitely have to compliment the writer for this one. I think the animals I brought up last week where I said like, oh, like sometimes if an animal like an anthropomorphic animal show is done right, the idea is that like the animals are really there to make sure that you don't focus too much on let's say like, oh, like this character is super hot or this character is whatever, right? It kind of like helps you just isolate more on just like the literary elements of it. I will say that, yeah, I mean with this show, like I said, once again, like it's very vibrant characters, like very good, snappy, very sharp dialogue and very vibrant characters. The only reason this one didn't get like a surge all the way to the top is because it has a decent amount of setup, but we have to kind of see where it goes. That being said, for a first episode, I do think like, yeah, from a literary perspective, a very very well done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this one. I think mystery is always a nice drama to watch because you, as a viewer, don't know what to expect, and I think it's on them to kind of surprise you.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, number 4, Shadow's House. Same scores across the board. This one was pretty good. Again, a mystery.
Yes.
The first episode was really interesting because all it did was explore the dynamic between the relationship of Kate, who is the shadow in the red, and
center,
her
her
doll is what I think they call her, right?
Yeah,
It's
the doll.
what's her name?
Yes. Is wait, she gives her a longer name in the middle of the episode. I forget what it was.
Emiliko?
Is it Emiliko? Something like that. It's like Emily, and then they made it even longer because like it was just kind of like their thing. But yeah.
So so it's interesting to see what this whole. I don't even know what the premise really is, right? Because right now what we're given is that the human, right, is just there to have facial expressions for the shadows, right?
So that they can be and this is to quote the main character is like, oh, like to remind us about what it is to be human, like to remind us like kind of like the human sides of us, like
and so you just see the relationship of the two with like mundane normal activities, and then at the end of the episode we see another pairing, right? Another royal and they're human, and it doesn't look like a healthy relationship.
Yeah, like it looks very like wah wah wah. And kind of it ends on an emotional like I guess like high / mystery, and that's kind of how the episode cuts off. It's like you see another couple, she sees another shadow, and then her doll, and then it looks nothing like their relationship, and so I think that for the mystery genre. I think that once again there is just kind of like what we expected last week. There is a decent amount of storytelling, specifically of kind of like, oh, like here's the shadow, and like these are like literal one-on-ones of each other. I haven't actually watched the Jordan Peele movie, like the horror one, where like. Yeah, I think it's one. It's one where like the versions, right? Like so, it's like it's those type of things where it's like, oh, like you see, like, oh, here's this, and then here's like a dark side version, and I do think that those type of setups end up generating a pretty decent amount of like just exploration, and this first episode did hit that mark. I do think that there is like a decent amount of the dynamic and all that type of stuff to be there. I am interested to kind of see where it is going, because I do think that the first episode at least does a pretty I wouldn't say it's a complete nicely wrapped bow, but like it does kind of like delve just a lot into these two specific characters, and so I'm wondering what are kind of the other elements that'll be tossed in. The slice, shall we almost say like the slice of life story of the interactions between these two seems to be at least somewhat wrapped up by the end of the first episode, and so what are they gonna actually do in the future episodes will be kind of
Yeah, because
yeah,
I mean, the entire first episode takes
yeah,
place in Kate's bedroom, right?
yeah,
There's no exploration
mhm,
of the settings outside,
yeah,
so we don't
mhm,
know how this society works, and I think
yeah,
that's important topic to uncover.
yeah,
All right, again, I think this might be the last one, number four, but I may
yes,
be wrong.
hmm,
But
yeah,
it is the Saints' magic power is omnipotent.
hmm,
Same scores across the board. This one is Isekai, and funny enough, I feel like all the isekais that we talked about have done generally well.
yeah, which is surprising because uh for those of you, and just to remind everyone, I guess, kind of my potential biases as we listen, like these guys are another one of the genres that I generally have a really big distaste for. Whereas just like, oh, I think it's like just bullshit escapism is kind of just like stroking like a very, it's this idea where it's like, oh, like don't worry, there'll be like a reset button if you live like a toxic lifestyle. Then there's just like this crazy new world where like you're literally like a god and all that type of BS.
Mhm.
So I generally have very little faith when it comes to isekais. That being said, this one, we did call this one out last week, where it looked like the setup of it wasn't like she was just gonna be some like crazy battle god, like just like
Yeah.
stomping, like just curb stomping like the literal existence out of everything. This one has, even in the trailer, shows that it kind of takes an opposite slant where she's a saint and her magic is great, as the title suggests, but it's told from the perspective of somebody who wants to heal people slash has an interest in alchemy. And so
Yeah.
it is even though it is an isekai, I do think that the setup of, it's just not literally her being like a combat person that's just been overtold in anime like 5,000 times because it's a video game premise, right? Like I think this one has fresh enough of a premise to make it interesting. I will say that even though not a crap ton of of character development has happened, once again, I think it's a combination of, number one, the characters are still pretty like well done. Like animations are really well done. I do think that the characters are likable in terms of like,
Yeah.
or
Oh,
even if it's not necessarily likable, like very understandable and like kind of you can buy into kind of like why they are the way that they are type of things. Like I think the show does a pretty good job of selling that. And yeah,
yeah.
I mean,
I put here at the end on my
mhm,
notes here that
yeah,
I don't remember. Do you remember?
yeah,
So there's a split-second scene at the end, and I
yes.
put here that it's a mystery. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, I think it was, wasn't it something like, oh, like they're not okay, so he reports and it goes like, oh, like is this because of the saint's power or some shit like that? Like, oh, is she like the saint? And then they go da da da. Like I'm not sure. Was that the mystery, or was there
No,
like,
there's a scene, like I don't know what the scene is though. If it's like someone else, or so there's some sort of scene that happened at the end for just a split second to throw in
okay,
a mystery.
okay,
Could be like another character or
yeah,
something,
yeah,
but
okay,
I
fair
just
enough.
noted it here, but I can't recall what the moment was.
Yeah, I don't remember either. But yeah, like I said, it's a pretty refreshing perspective. Yes, it is still set in, shall we say, the prototypical
Yeah,
Middle Earth setting. That being said, though, I do think that once again, because the MC, like I said, isn't some sort of combat video game, super curb stomper, the premise in of itself already kind of lends to more interesting angles. And yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it was, like I said, the characters are well done enough to the point where there's like me as a viewer, like I had some investment in it, so I'm kind of excited to see where it'll go next.
yeah. I think this wraps up the top 10, right?
Alrighty, so you've been hearing some pretty decently positive stuff from us, and we are going to go on now to the middle 15.
Yeah, so these we're gonna just kind of breeze
Yeah,
by. Maybe we could talk about one point. So
yeah,
number 11, Godzilla singular point. I give it a 5. You give it a 6.
yeah. I think that we called out it's a Godzilla story at the end of the day. Like like
Yeah.
how good can you make it? I think that it does like an okay job. Like I said, like it's the first episode was good enough for me to be like, oh, I want to watch what happens next. I think that overall, like I think the individual category ratings I gave it were like all just very well rounded down the middle type of stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, I want to say that I wasn't the most excited, so I think
yeah,
it needs to give me more
yeah,
wow factor.
yeah.
All right, and number 11 is Mars Red. Same scores as Godzilla here.
Yeah, I
I
think this. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I think this is the same vein where I want to.
Yeah,
There's a lot of mystery involved with this one,
yeah,
and so I want to see Where did they
Yeah,
go?
I think that they went a little bit hard in the over dramatized opening, and
Yeah,
like it's just like melodramatic as hell. But like I do think that
yeah,
like
yeah,
there is like a decent amount of potential. I mean, yeah, it was okay. Don't get me wrong. I was like hella over the top. I was like, jeez, man, like what the? But like yeah, I mean, like I see potential. Is kind of the best way to say it. The rest of it just all like seems pretty pedestrian. Yeah.
yeah. Number 11 again. All these ties are SSSS Dyna Xenon. This time I give it a 6 and you gave it a 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think not a lot has happened yet in the episode,
Yeah.
and so I want to see where it goes.
Yeah, I like for me personally, I think it was almost a little bit too like anime tropey at the beginning. That being said, I can't okay. Let me put it like this: I've seen enough anime shows where the first episode, the characters seemed really tropey and it still ended up being pretty good, which is why I didn't give it like that bad of a rating. Like I was kind of like, oh, this is like very prototypical, but I do think that like they've done enough with it for me to be like, oh, this is decent. Like it could be good. It could be good, and so yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
where the rating ended up.
Cool. Number 11 again. Super Cub. Pretty
Um,
comfy.
Yeah, it's very comfy. I will say that this one almost gives me like a little bit of, shall I say, like Miyazaki levels of character reflection and kind of like you as a it's like it helps. Let me tell you like this. So there's kind of two ways that you can do anime. Number one, which is admittedly kind of almost a more intuitive way, is just to literally show like so many things and just kind of like, oh, I'll take it in, and then you figure out, okay, this is kind of what it's about. And then there's a second style specifically for, shall I say, like character development, where they purposely, there's a lot of pauses, there's a lot of saturation of emotional moments where like essentially like they want you as a viewer to almost kind of like, okay, like here's something we've shown you like a decent amount of it, but then they kind of want you to take it, they want you to like feel the like feel the extra parts of it and then use that feeling to kind of like fill in the gaps. Like yeah, like this is an incredibly comfy show. I will say that like, like there's a lot of I'll be the first to admit there's a lot of pauses. It's a very slow pace, but I do think that like I said, like even though there are a lot of, shall I say, moments of silence between the clapping to make sure that you notice the clapping per Miyazaki. Like yeah, it's like the space between the claps is what makes it claps, right? And I think that this is like really characteristic of like there wasn't too many things that actually ended up happening, but yeah, like I said, emotional pauses, and just that kind of stuff like at least helps you form an opinion on her emotional journey. As a little
Yeah.
aside, there is also a decent. I'm maybe a little bit biased about this, but I think that the music they ended up picking. There's a lot of classical music in the trailer, and they use Claire de Lune. And yeah, I was like, oh man, like I think that, like I said, like it's kind of like this thing where I think like the pause once again, it's kind of like the pauses and the pacing and all that type of stuff like ends up making it pretty enjoyable. But yeah.
Yeah. I did not like the use of CG in some of
Okay.
the
Yes.
artwork.
Yeah.
But other than the CG work, I thought the artwork was really well
Yeah,
done.
I will say that like like using CG for like going down like a bike path. I'm like dog, like it's not that much. It's like you could just draw that like yeah.
Yeah,
I
you
was
don't.
like I was like what? This isn't even that much. Like, okay, like if you're Overlord and you have like 1,000 goblins, like okay, sure, like that's kind of like a pain in the ass to like draw that many things and like animate out a full battlefield. I'm like she's literally going down a path. Like you don't have to CG that. I mean, so
Yeah,
I kind of had
I
to
did.
yeah, I was kind of like, what the hell is going on? Come on, guys, like it's not that bad. But yeah, like I said, it's the reason it didn't get that much higher of a score once again. It's just it's very prototypical, comfy, and it doesn't, even though I do compare it to Miyazaki, there's nowhere near that level of shall I say like like epic emotional moments. That being said, it's also just episode one, and so
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, I mean just it's a very prototypical yet pretty well done example of like a comfy anime.
Yeah. At number 11, The Way of the House Husband, JC Staff. This one, the artwork was radically different. And I know
Oh,
reading
okay.
online in comments
Yeah.
that some people dislike the anime style
Okay.
or the artwork style.
Yeah.
I generally liked it. I thought it
Yeah.
actually helped in some
Yeah.
of the delivery of the jokes.
Yeah. I think that this was one of the ones where I had hoped it would pick up some more like Gintama vibes. I will say it didn't quite get to that level, but it was so decent enough. Like I said, like I do think that there's a little bit more, shall I say, like some of the ham-fisted humor. Like it's actually kind of like it gets delivered like pretty soundly. I think just, audio visually and all that type of stuff, like as a package, it's almost like, like because it is like a not so, the subject matter is a mafia guy, a yakuza guy that now is a house
The
husband,
house
and so
husband.
it's
Yeah.
supposed to be kind of like a little bit like ridiculous humor, right? Like absurd humor. And so I
Yeah.
do think that like audio visually it kind of did deliver it pretty well. I will say that usually these are the type of shows that I like a lot, and I'm not
Hmm.
delivering too much of that, and I was a little bit disappointed by that. But once again, first episode, I do think that there's potential. We'll kind of see where it goes
Yeah.
story
So
wise. Yeah.
unfortunately, this show only has 5 episodes.
Ah. Okay. Well.
Yeah, and they
Uh.
already announced the second season,
Okay. All right.
which is
Well,
fun.
I guess there's a second season coming, and yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. I think that yeah. Once again, it's pretty. Yeah. It's not something to write home about, but it's also not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So number 16. So now we've passed the second big tie. Number 16
Yeah.
is Burning Kabaddi. I gave it a 5.5. You gave it a 5. This is the second show now that I
Yes.
scored it higher than you.
Yeah.
So this is a sports anime about the sport kabaddi, which is a
Mhm.
very, I mean, I have never heard of the sport before.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's like a advanced version of tag per se.
Yeah.
I thought it was nice the way they characterized the main character.
Mhm.
The way I mean, the beginning portion was just characterizing him as this guy who knew what he was doing, and he was
Yeah.
like outsmarting everyone. And obviously, he practices
Yeah.
a session and realizes like, yeah, I'm full of myself, and
Yeah.
because of that, he has to play the sport.
Yeah.
Ing-
Yeah.
Outstanding, right?
Yeah, the to give a little bit of context to Minatsu's comment about the scoring, once again, we do a rolling average to kind of give you like a more of a sense of like where this show lands relative to the other ones. The reason the rolling average is useful is because it ends up being that the scores that I gave for the most part, like there's actually I think less than 5 shows where Manatsu actually just gave it a straight up higher rating than I did. And so, yeah, this is one of the few ones where the rating was actually ended up higher. I will say for me personally, I thought that like this was like literally like I thought that it was just so over the top of just kind of, shall I say, like sports tropiness that I was kind of like, like like literally like the short guy with like the can do attitude and shit like that. The main
Yeah,
like
and
it's
he's
like
bald
oh like
too.
yeah like of course he's bald too and like and I will say that I did a little bit of research on Kabaddi slash read some of the comments and
Yeah,
the people who are from are the great country of India. I really appreciated that they actually made a show featuring
preaching kabaddi.
featuring Kabaddi, which I'm assuming is originated in India slash is popular in India, and so that is interesting. I do think that when it comes to sports animes, one of the problems is that usually there's not that much you can tell about like a sport before you just have to either before usually, and this is where sports animes usually go, they just end up like dumping into some like supernatural deep end bullshit with this story slash this premise, because most viewers don't actually know that much about Kabaddi, obviously besides our Indian or Indian American viewers. There's a lot of technical things that they can cover, and even just the explanation of the technical things end up kind of like tying in with like some of like the characters like traits and that type of stuff. Whereas let's say for example in basketball, if you were to be like, oh man, like he just likes to be like he likes to have control and therefore he likes to dribble a lot, it's kind of like okay, all right, sure, like why not, like it's like less
Hmm.
interesting. So yeah, I
Yeah,
do think that like having the medium be a sport that not a lot of people know about ends up almost kind of like doing, shall I say, a sports anime a favor. And so there is
yeah,
definitely some potential with this.
yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
intrigue of it just being a sport that no one knows is because
Yeah.
I went to on YouTube to see
Mhm.
a example of a
Okay.
professional match.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not see a wink of that in the first episode. It obviously
Okay.
it makes
Yeah.
like it's not
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
it was just a practice session,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see if it actually heads toward that direction because then it gets
Yeah.
really complicated with the rules and stuff.
Yeah.
Number 16 as well, Fairy Ranmaru.
Yeah.
I gave it a 5.5 and you gave it a 5. This
Uh,
one I thought was gonna do really bad, but it's
yeah.
actually not too bad. Not the
Yeah.
worst thing in the world.
Yeah. This is kind of what I imagined. Okay, the live actions is pretty great. Shaolin Soccer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
whatchamacallit, Fairy Ramaru was one of the shows where I was like, oh yeah, this is what I don't like about the anime industry, where they just like almost hypersexualize the crap out of stuff to the point where like
Mhm.
it's just a blinding light of sexualization and you can see nothing
Yeah,
else. This is what I was afraid of. Not to say that the characters aren't gaudy. I mean,
it's not. Yeah.
this is okay. Like we have some shows in here where it's like focused on oh like beautiful guys or beautiful girls, but and this one definitely doesn't shy away from that. But I do think that like almost kind of like in spite of that, there's like at least like an okay amount of stuff where it's like okay, like I can see this going somewhere. Once again, I will admit that I kind of have a distaste for, shows that are too ecchi, or I think what the opposite of that yaoi, is that correct? Is that the correct term to use? Or
No,
oh, okay.
yaoi is the opposite of yuri.
Okay, okay. So whatever, like ecchi, like the ecchi vibes
Well,
type of thing. I'm a
ecchi
big.
can be
Oh,
referred
okay, okay,
to both sexes.
okay, okay.
It's just a
So
general
in this
term.
case, like yeah, so like the etchiness of it, like it's still there, but I will say that like it didn't end up being as bad. Of
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, because the whole problem that they had, because the whole idea of Mahou Shoujo is like
yeah,
the problem at hand is being symbolized by a bigger battle, which in this case it
yeah,
did, right? And so
mm,
at least they delivered on that front. Plus,
yeah,
I think the artwork was gorgeous for this episode.
yeah,
All right, Shaman King. So this is also tied, but the scores are a little bit different because I give it a 4.5
yeah.
and you gave
This
it a
is
6.
I think this one had one of the larger differentials, in
Yeah,
terms of
yeah,
ratings
yeah.
that the two of us gave. I will say that I've leaned a little bit on the benefit. I kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt when I gave the rating. I will say straight up that I didn't enjoy the first episode that much. I do
Yeah,
think
me
okay
neither.
I do think for a shonen the fact that the I guess the mechanic of quote unquote speaking to the spirits, and I will say that it didn't go like too okay. Despite the amount of tropiness that was in it, I do think that the premise in of itself, I can see it being set up for a little bit more differentiation versus regular shonens, and it wasn't all that bad. I will say that I was just kind of more annoyed than anything. It was kind of like the vibe when I was watching
Yes,
the first show. Yeah,
because of the chibi character.
I don't. Okay, like if you're gonna do a chibi character, like please, like keep this show not serious. Like chibi as an art style is supposed to be like ridiculous, right? Like for example, I think one of the my personal actually favorite shows is called Naruto SD, where it's just like it's like a slapstick Gintama level parody of the Naruto universe, and all the characters are chibi there, right? Like that's okay if the show's like not supposed to be serious, and you have a big bunch of chibis running around. It's like okay, yeah, like you're not supposed to take it seriously, especially okay. The extra bad part is that you mix it with non chibi characters, and it's just like it's kind
Yeah,
of
and
this
it's
thing where it's just like yeah, it's like it's really jarring. Where it's just like dude, like what the heck is going on here, man? Like yeah, I will say that like my vibe this okay there will be a show later which I think you and I both already know in our heads that like has way more of a higher annoying factor, but this one was definitely kind of like up there where I was just kind of like oh this is kind of annoying, but yeah, um I guess we'll see where it goes though. Still has potential. Like I said, shonens generally kind of trophy starts, and they could bloom into something good.
yeah. So number 19, Joran, the Princess of Blood and Snow. I thought this was a interesting show. I like the action sequences.
Yeah.
We'll see. I think where they take it because I don't think there's anything. I mean, yeah, I think it's just the art was gorgeous, but there's not much substance.
Yeah, there really wasn't like a lot of substance. I will say like this is kind of like one of those examples where like I watched and I was like, damn, that's it's almost like okay, like if this was a portfolio for animators, like you did a good job, but like there isn't too much substance. Now that being said though, it is kind of like you're setting up a premise for potentially like more interesting stuff to happen. Technically, at the very last second before it cuts to like the end, there is like an interesting thing that happens, and so it's like
Yeah.
so you're like huh I kind of want to watch it. I think I personally think that it seems like what little substance was there seemed like it was like incredibly melodramatic, but
Yeah.
we'll see, yeah, like um
Seven Knights Revolution Hero Successor. We both gave it a 5.
yeah,
I had low expectations for this one,
yeah.
but no, not the worst thing in the world. I don't think
uh
it did anything good, but I don't think it did anything
yeah,
bad.
I will say for sure like the I will say that the vibe that I got when I ended it was like there wasn't anything spectacular about it. It was like the first.
Yeah.
It was like how like unspectacular it was kind of like the first thing that popped into my mind. That being said, though, the art style is still decent. I will have to give it like the benefit of the doubt slash like just looking at it from a literary perspective of like how they set it up. I do think there's some potential. There's some potential for good storytelling.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, like I said, like just pretty down the middle.
Tokyo Revengers number 19. I think this was cool. The whole time lapse, and I
Yeah.
think the fun part is the ending where he
Yeah.
realizes he saves the guy but didn't save the girl. So now he has to go. I think he has to go back again and try.
Yeah,
to
he has to
fix
go
things.
back. Yeah. I think it's let me put it like this. I think that it's actually very it does a pretty good job at exploring emotions. And I think that this show has a benefit of essentially kind of almost like this. We have a term for this in Chinese. I'm trying to think of the best way to say it in English. Okay, maybe there isn't necessarily a word, but it's like this idea of like looking back and having regret slash like kind of like wishing that things could be different element, because there is a time travel element. They get to actually explore this like pretty well. Essentially, like a dude who is, shall I say, more in the middle of society's bell curves in present day, right? Like back in the day, he used to be a revenger, right? Like a Tokyo little gangster boy, and like just being able to see him kind of explore the whole like, well, shit, this is what it used to be like, and that aspect, because we have a time skip aspect, really being able to kind of like delve into the idea of like who I was, who I want to become type of thing. And like I said, like it's this term that we have in Chinese, like that's like very popular. But yeah, like it's essentially this idea of like, oh, like looking back and kind of like thinking about what could have been type of thing. Like
Yeah.
it does a pretty good job of that.
All right, number 22, Cestus, the Roman fighter. This is one of the shows that we both thought wasn't going to do well because the trailer CG was horrid, and I still believe the CG is horrid. But other than that, I thought this was pleasantly well done in terms of who he is. They already, like, out of the gates told us as a viewer, oh, his skills is in technique and agility.
Yeah.
That's how he wins, and so just trying to see how that evolves.
Yeah. Once again, the not gonna lie to you guys and girls, the CGI was still really bad, but like surprisingly for a fighting anime, the other things ended up doing pretty well. Like I think like just telling kind of like the story of who he is, like characterizing like what type of person he is, what type of person his sensei is. Some of the for some of you who are like looking at the poster and wondering like like who the other people are, like some of those characters also been characterized decently. I did find it a little bit interesting that they try to paint Nero as this nice innocent kid, which by almost every account of history does not seem to be the case. But I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see what happens with that character. Maybe he eventually turns around and like becomes the Nero that we all know. But
I mean, he's okay with the fighting. It's weird because he was not okay with the fighting, but
no, that's the thing where I was just like, where it's almost like they try to paint him as like this empathetic character who goes, oh, it's so horrible that they fight, and it's just kind of like, well, this is like the Nero and empathy was like probably like the most two antithesis things like based on the things we know about him. But yeah, like I said, interesting. I will say, if you almost contradictorily speaking, if you're here to like find some like crazy amazing action sequences, this is not where you're gonna find it. But no, like not at all. Like I thought it was just like absolutely horrid. Like for a fighting show, I was like, dude, like come on, like invest into your animations and stuff like that. Like, but I do think that the things surrounding it end up being pretty decent, and we'll kind of see where it goes.
Yeah, I think for the sake of time, let's just rush through the last three of this middle. So let's make a mug 2 comfy.
Yeah,
I like the artwork a lot.
Yeah, it's very very comfy. I don't think that this will end up being one of those shows where it's like, oh, like you'll remember it forever type of stuff. But it does but it does do like decent enough of a job, and like I said, it's comfortable. Oh, sorry. I'll say. I was like, let me click through that too. Quickly.
So backflip is the next one. This might be on the chopping block next week, in my opinion, because the CG is just terrible, even worse than Cestus.
Yeah. This one, like, it once again was one of the things where it's like, okay, like the story. Okay, for a sports anime, I do think that the story wasn't too bad. Okay, like the story wasn't too bad. Like I think that there was actually like a decent amount of substance. That's what I put in my notes. It's like, oh, like pretty well executed for like for like sports anime. I guess maybe my bar for sports anime is just lower for like characters and stuff like that. That being said, it's like once again like if your focus is supposed to be on action, like please for the love of God, like just like get your stuff together. Like it's like yeah, like it's like the fighter one where it's just like dude, like really now like yeah, like it's yeah so.
And the last one, Pretty Boy Detective Club. This one was interesting because I enjoyed it because the animation was beautifully done. I
Yes.
thought it was gorgeous, and the way they talk and the dialogue they use is very reminiscent of like the Monogatari series.
Yeah.
Uh, but substance-wise, there's still a lot that needs to happen.
Yeah. This is one of the shows where like I like had to admit like the J score that I gave it was really low, but I still had to admit that like like the animation was done really well. I think the characters were still done decently, and so yeah. Definitely on the for me personally, I thought it was a little bit like the amount of time they focused on like like we are so beautiful and like that type of crap like seemed to me like a little bit over the top, but it's like I mean like I said like we'll see where it goes. We'll see where it goes. Alrighty. Bottom 10. Welcome to the Flame Zone.
Yeah, so these are the 10 shows that we can choose to drop, and so we're dropping 4 at the very least, and so we'll still rate sort them from high to low, and then we get to choose anywhere in this 10 which one to drop at the end of this podcast.
Be prepared for at least for me. I know for me, I'm gonna be very animatedly flaming some of these. So yeah, brace your ears for some abrasive commentary.
So Blue Reflection Ray. Rolling average of 4.25, number 26. Yeah. I think this is your typical. I thought this was your typical Mahou Shoujo.
Yeah.
Like
I will say like this one. Okay, this is kind of like the little sound bite right for the recording. This is the only show that I had to watch multiple times. I like genuinely just like didn't know what the shit was going on. I was like, this is kind of like okay, like it's the second time I watched it. I was like, okay, like I kind of see like where like how this was to link to that or whatever. But I was just like, dude, like you can't make me like have to like rewatch it just to like try to understand what the heck's going on. I think like Mahou Shoujo wise, it's still very typical. Like it's still very prototypical, and so it does nothing special with that. And it's like it's just kind of like all over the freaking place. I
think the animation too was a little bit jarring.
Yeah, like the animation was so. I think the animation didn't contribute to the confusion. Whereas like sometimes I'm just like, oh, like what's happening? It's like, oh, I get it. It's like, oh, like supposed to be cool psychedelic colors equals like another dimension, but it's like, dude, like come on, like once again, like for me personally, like anime should be like I watch it once and I understand. If I go back again, it's because I want to savor something, not because I want to go back and understand it. It's not like some Christopher Nolan movie or like some like Steven Spielberg movie. It's like, oh, look at the details, look at this, it's so crazy. It's like no, it shouldn't be like that. That was Reflection Ray was didn't enjoy that one very much.
Higehiro. This was the funny enough. I thought this show would be rated higher than Koikimo.
Yes,
but I enjoyed Koikimo a lot more.
Yes,
this first episode was so dull and so boring.
Yeah, like holy crap! Like I'll just say it like straight up upright. Like the red flags that my reaction of like, oh my gosh, there's some red flags like. They were there. Okay, don't get me wrong. Like
nothing happened, right?
Like nothing happened, but like boy, were all the red flags just right there. And like the fact that like, okay, like just like minor spoilers. Like when the dude actually like almost kind of gives like himself a little bit of pause and goes, "Well, she is really cute." I'm just like, dude, like stop, man. Like what the like man, it's just like like I think like it was okay. Let me put it like this. There was a lot of red flags that didn't end up getting justified like by like kind of like the stuff that happened. Like for example, right? Like if we're gonna talk about Don't Toy With Me, right? There's like some red flags that are going on there, but it's like, oh, like the red flags are justified by kind of like some of the stuff that's like going on in the story, and like it helps like tell something. This is like so dull. Like it was somehow really dull. Like it had a lot of like just like big like open up FBI moments, and it like still wasn't just like it didn't like actually do anything with like said, shall I say, edgy aspects. Yeah. It was it's just some oof.
I became slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level by Revo Root. This wasn't too bad. It was just not much content for me to enjoy.
This is I think like when I was talking about the isekais, especially I think which one was it? The Saint's Magic Powers Omnipotent. This is like the polar opposite of it, where it's like literally like as tropey as isekais gets, they are there. I will say that it's not to the point where like I'm watching them and literally be like, this is unbearably annoying. Like, but but it's just like it's just so plainly tropey that I'm just like, geez, like you literally could have like okay, like you could have had an AI like read Yasuke plot lines and generate this. Like there was
Yeah.
like so like yeah, like it was just absolutely pedestrianly tropey and just average. Nothing of amazing substance happens. There's just, for lack of a better reason, it's like, for lack of a better way to say it, it's like I almost feel like I can picture what happens in the series and it wouldn't be that far off, and I don't feel like I have a reason to like continue to watch because it's just like damn, like it's just
Yeah,
like
there's
yeah,
nothing about it that compels me to be like, oh yeah,
yeah.
I'm really invested in the characters.
Yeah, exactly. Like, phew, like, jeez, like I said, like bot generated stuff.
Okay, Osamake. This was so the reason why we're having this podcast on Wednesday is because this is one of the shows that premiered today.
Yeah.
Uh,
Osamake, man, is this some? I okay.
so first of all, the character in the top left is like my from Bunny
Yes.
Girl Senpai
Yes.
0.5.
Yeah.
Instead of an actress, she's an author,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
It's,
the whole motive or the plot of like, oh, let's pretend we're dating. I don't know. I just don't buy into that. Like
no,
that never
it's
happened to me.
it's okay. Let me put it like this: like the dialogue slash the events of this show, like, and apologies for the bracelets, but here comes like it's if you okay, the only type of people who would look at this and be like, oh damn, this is clever, are people who have like zero life experience. It's like people who like actually like have somewhat lived a life look at this stuff and go, this is kind of stupid. Like just like okay, like for example, like just be completely honest, like yeah, like rewind 30 seconds. When Minatsu was like, I just don't really buy it. The premise is kind of dumb. Like yeah, anyone with like any like actual IRL experience with like the gender they're interested in and kind of like romantic relationships, friendships, and all that type of stuff, like instantly there's just like it you get like a I don't really buy it like BS flag thrown down because like if you've lived real life, like this isn't how things go. This isn't like yeah, and like that, like I said, like I could almost see how like oh like the manga okay like so let's say like let's say if the mangaka who wrote this was truly like your super prototypical mangaka who just like never left the house, like I can see how people who like just have zero life experience would look at this and be like, oh dude, it's such a clever setup, blah blah, but it's just like yeah, like I said, it's so divorced from reality and just kind of like some of the stuff that happens, for example, like I like wrote down one note where it's like, oh, like the girl gets mad that like people are looking at like a pinup of her. It's like, okay, like what do you think, like who do you think girls are? It's like girls, like it's like okay, like girls can be like, you know what I mean? I don't know, it's just like little things like that where it's just like, dude, like come on, like you just like it seems like the person who wrote this like doesn't actually really understand humans. Like their understanding of humans comes from like animes, and like it's just like yeah, like I said, like the premise and shit like that's just really hard to buy into. Just kind of like okay, like
yeah, I'm always also in the camp of the main character doesn't make the decisions. It's
yeah,
like why
I mean,
the main character not making any of these decisions?
oh yeah, and this is actually kind of personally a gripe that I sometimes have with Eastern media, so to speak. There's this kind of thing that I do talk about with people occasionally, where I say like, oh, like the Western story is the fantasy of the self making all the difference. The Eastern story is the fantasy of having the world literally force you into these situations and have things happen to you, right? As opposed to you making things happen.
Yeah,
and this is like the most prototypical example of that, where like the dude is like literally the most passive like actor possible, and just like shit's happening to him, and it's like, oh, let's go for this wild ride, right? It's like very K-drama-esque, where like the main characters do like fucking goddamn jack shit for like the whole plot, and just like shit happens to them. It's like yippee, let's go for the ride. So yeah, not very. There's a lot of flame there.
Yeah. So at number 26, The World Ends With You, the animation. This one was just
I
the
think
animation was solid,
yeah.
but it was just so boring.
Yeah, this one, actually, just for a little bit of a clarification, I think the ratings on here, you have to bump them all up by one. So,
Oh, is it off?
or yeah, I think this one in particular ended up being a little bit off. But I mean, that being said, though, it still ended up being like a like one of the low scores, and it's pretty much for the reasons that you said. Like, okay, sure, like the animation's not bad. Like I think with this one particularly, the categories, like yeah, like I gave the animation like a decent credit, but it's just like. Let me put it like this. It's like, imagine like a show. Okay, for number one, I'm not even sure if this show actually sells a toy. I don't think it does. But like the vibe of it is just like, it's so like just like random. Okay, like for example, like okay, you look at Yu-Gi-Oh or you look at Pokemon, and there's some ass pull shit that's going on. It's like, oh, the idea is that like you're supposed to be selling a cool piece of merchandise. Like this one felt like there's just so much random.
Go forward. Maybe I'll change.
Okay.
I just edited. Okay, yeah, there we go.
Okay, yeah. Oops, that is not what I meant to do. So, yeah, like like there was just so much random ass pull crap, and like I said, like it didn't. At least to my knowledge, they're not actually even selling a toy here. It just comes off as even like just weirder, where it's just like.
It's based off a video game.
Okay,
so
okay, so there's a video game. So I guess like in reverse, like they're basing it on the video game, and if you've played the video game, it might not seem that ass pulley, but like just like from like a viewer perspective, it's like, dude, what the hell's going on, man? Like it's like nothing real. Okay, somehow like crazy things happen, yet nothing happened. Like weird,
it really
like
does.
yeah.
And there was supposed to be character development, but I didn't feel like it was actually there. I don't think the characters really developed.
Yeah, like not too much. It's like, oh, dude, it's so angsty. He has inner rage, and it's like, nope. It's like, yeah.
The mystery of having amnesia isn't compelling enough for me to want to watch this more.
Yeah, it's just like and okay, I will admit that I do think the animations from a technical perspective are also done pretty well. I also just don't personally, it's like a little bit migraine inducing for me to see like this type of animation. This is just a personal taste thing. I think that the almost, shall I say, like the Western cartoon of like using the extremely heavy lines and the, shall I say, like super cartoonish proportions, at least for the MC and the like the main character and the main girl, like yeah, just kind of just a little bit nauseating to me. Yeah.
Yeah, to your eternity. And I think we discussed about this one. So this one had high expectations because I read the manga, and boy, did the first episode disappoint.
Holy
so
crap.
If you don't know, if a show is based off of manga, typically one anime episode will cover about 3 to 5 chapters of manga.
Yes, yeah, that's
this
about the regular pacing.
episode covered a whopping 1 chapter.
Yeah, I think I kind of understood what the studio had envisioned when they tried to set up the story, the first episode as such. It's supposed to be this like almost like epic wonderment like type of thing, and no, it just came off as just like, dude, like shitty narrator doesn't shut the hell up, like just like some random bullshit happening. It's like it's so much like, I understand that a narrator can, like in some instances if done right, evoke a sense of epicness, or like, you know, like shall I say, like almost like a level of excitement. Like, dude, this just ended up being like a tell thing. It's like, oh, like instead of showing, you were telling, and just yeah, like it's just like the amount, like so little happened in the first episode. Like contrary to Odd Taxi, this is the one where like the plot line for what happens is like 3 arrows, and that's it. Like
I mean, it's just really one.
Yeah.
I mean, he just left, right?
Yeah, like I mean, he leaves and like wah, and that's it. Like it's like, yeah, like 3 arrows is even like being like extremely generous. Like yeah, it was just so slow. Like I said, like this was one of those things where it just like felt like it was like cardinal sin of like, oh, like you're telling instead of showing, all that type of stuff. Like it's just kind of like, ugh, like yeah, this is very disappointing. This was one of the shows I had a really high expectations for, and boy, for it to last this, like to land this far down the list is definitely kind of like a disappointing.
So Battle Athletes Victory Restart.
On the topic of disappointment. Yeah.
I mean, this one I don't think this was like horrible.
Okay.
But in the same vein, nothing really happened.
Okay, I will say, like last week when we were talking about the idea that, oh, like if a show's getting a reboot, right? Like Hunter x Hunter, like, you know, like Full Metal Alchemist, like, oh man, the original thing must have been pretty good, and that's kind of the expectations I was doing. I was like, oh, it must be pretty decent, man. Like absolutely almost nothing happened in it. It felt like it was just also like somehow like it was okay. Let me put it like this: there are some animes that pull off physicality and like have a hyper focus on physicality that ends up still making sense, like kind of aids the storytelling, right? Like there are plenty of shows with, even shall I dare say, like a little bit of like ecchi setups that still end up being like, you know, like the etchiness has a purpose. This one like had like an incredible focus on like, oh, like, you know, we're people, we have bodies, blah blah, and all that type of stuff, and like it just did nothing with it at all. And I was just like, what is going on? Like it just felt like such a snooze fest. Like
the first episode was quite slow.
And I was just, if Blue Reflection Ray was like a show where I was like, damn, I had to rewatch it just to understand what the hell is going on. This is like the exact opposite, where it's just like, dude, like please, like I can watch this
Hurry
like
up.
0.5 times, like I mean 2x speed, and like still feel like I got the same experience. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree. Pacing was really weird for this one.
yeah,
I mean, I haven't watched the original, so I don't know how much of it has
yeah,
changed. But
exactly. But I had a
yeah,
little bit
I
higher
also think
expectations
I
for a
also think the whole
reboot.
concept of Cosmo Queen is like,
Yeah,
okay,
like I
I
said, it's
guess.
just like there's such a big focus on like body, and like I said, like you can, like, cause in the end, no matter what you want to say about it, like human bodies are part of the human experience, right? And
Yeah.
like it's a central part, and you can make some good storytelling out of it. They just did absolutely nothing with it, and it's just like I said, it's like this almost like this weird, the weird vibe you get when you watch like or like when okay. I'm sure most of you haven't watched this. I haven't watched this either, but like from what I've seen online, like oh like watching like my what is that like toddlers and tiaras or whatever, like the kind of uncomfortableness of just like, dude, like what, like it's just like okay, like yeah, like a big bunch of focus on like, yeah, like I said, it's just like it just felt like really uncomfortable. Like wasn't much that's like to be done with it. Yeah, just
Yeah.
all right.
So,
Drag
yeah.
Dragon
Okay.
goes house
Yeah.
hunting.
Yeah.
Earlier in the show, I mentioned there is I think it was when I was when we were talking about Shaman King. I said that there was a level of persistence of kind of like annoyance that was happening. Um,
Oh, so
when we
you
said
also
that,
don't like the dragon.
yeah, okay. When we talk about like actual annoyance, like literally cranked to like migraine inducing levels, this one was that. Yeah.
Yeah, I put in my notes here that the protagonist needs to stop whining. I just can't.
I understand like it's almost like supposed to be kind of funny that he's like a whiner, but like it's just
Mhm.
like the timbre of his voice and like just like the ridiculous like okay, like let me put it like this. Uh really clumsy, can't do shit protag. It can still be executed well, but like man, like they took this idea and like literally like tried to like it's almost like they had a contest of like let's see how many times we can like make this guy just like whine and bitch about bullshit like and just like
Yeah.
literally
I
like go
I
ahead.
enjoyed the concept of like monsters having to go house hunt.
Yes.
Like, oh, because I don't want to I don't want the human RPG players to kill me. I just want to live in my home. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so this dragon needs to go house hunting, but man, that was that not a pleasurable experience.
No, like he's just like literally like okay, like and I'm sure like I'm not disparaging the voice actor for essentially I'm pretty sure just following the notes down like to the T. But like
Mhm.
man, it's just like if I wanted to listen to like a whiny kid just literally just cry and whine the whole time, I'd volunteer for like a preschool Montessori program and just like go plant myself there instead of watching an anime.
Yeah,
Like
no, it's
Jesus, like
bad.
yeah. I'm just like, dude, like what? Like okay, like it may be funny like the first 2 or 3 times you do it for like an entire 20 minutes of just like this guy literally crying. I shit you not, like actually crying into the goddamn mic and just like you're listening to this like little just like yeah, little bitch, little bitch just whining and crying the whole time. Like I said, like if I had more of a tolerance for this type of stuff, I'd be like a like a developing like a child development like like person like Jesus man like this shit it was not what I signed up for. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no. All right, Eden Zero. So
Um.
you had complaints about how it's similar to Fairy Tail, and I came in with a fresh mind because I
Yeah.
have no idea of Fairy Tail.
Yeah.
This was
Uh.
also really a big letdown. Characters didn't feel compelling. The whole premise was kind of meh.
Yeah.
Animation was kind of meh.
Yeah. Let me put it like this: if you came in this with a fresh slate like Manatsu did, you still end up being it's really meh. If you've come from a perspective where you've watched Fairy Tail and realized you've literally carbon copy bullshit and just slammed it over, it's as if like okay, like it's like I'm visually watching characters that look like characters in Fairy Tail, and sure, Fairy Tail wasn't that good at character development, but the fact that it also ran for like fucking 500 chapters or some shit like
Yeah.
that, like eventually, like you did get the character developments, and now I have to reverse all those preconceptions of that and be like, oh, this might not actually be the Lucy that I know, or this might not actually be the Happy that I know, this might not be the Natsu that I know, like, and like literally, like it might not actually be that, and then this one, not only do you have to sit there and like retroactively constantly fight back this idea of like, oh, like this is what I think this character should be like, they offer nothing in to replace that. There's nothing that actually happens with the characters. It's super shallow, and like, yeah, it's just like that. There's no substitute for what you think is gonna happen. And yeah, I mean, even if we were to take away like the my salt of like you literally slapstick Fairy Tale and put
Yeah.
them in space and just called it a day, like even if you were to put all that stuff aside, like just like the fact, okay, let me put it like this: the very first episode ended up pulling up, shall I say, like a really big trump card of kind of like a ooh, like here's what's actually happening type of thing, and it still didn't like end up like delivering like much
I
of an
already
emotional
predicted
spin.
maybe it's because I watch a lot of anime shows, but I
Yeah.
already knew what was happening. I was
Okay,
like,
this is what I'm saying. Like, it's supposed to be like a big twist, and it still just didn't deliver like anything. Like I said, like just like the
Yeah.
way it was executed, so like it didn't like amount to like anything. And the supposed to be like a decent twist. It's just like, oh shit, like
yeah.
yeah,
Whereas
like,
in since we're comparing to Shaman King,
Yeah.
Shaman King also you kind of knew who the sword
yeah,
brother was,
yeah,
but it was still really nice to see that
yeah.
happen.
Like at
But for
least
whatever
it's like
reason, I didn't feel that way about this show.
no, it's just like it's just so like it's okay. Let me put it like this: unless more likely than not, the quote unquote emotional aspect of what happened there literally has no impact on the rest of the story. That
Yeah.
is a kind of
Yeah.
part of it. Is that like literally like it doesn't matter at all. Like at the very least, like oh, like with the Shaman King, like oh the fact that you know like he kind of goes out of his way to understand kind of like the human struggle of like why some people might think that the swordsman and his brother were ridiculous, but it
Mhm.
ends up not being ridiculous in their eyes, and then that eventually plays into the fact that now we're gonna see this character more and all that type of stuff. Like it almost is like okay, there's like kind of some payoff for it. Like
Yeah.
this one, the twist happens and like it just literally has like I said, like unless there's something that else that ends up happening, but like just based on what they want you to, based on okay what the story's selling you, it matters literally zilch. It doesn't
No,
matter at all.
no.
And so it's just like yeah, you're just like okay, sure, whatever, and like it
Yeah,
just
because the beginning of the episode, the first thing establishes that this main character, I forget his name, has a
Yeah.
relationship with that one robot, Michael,
Yeah.
and then
Mhm.
Michael turns on him, but it didn't feel like he was really hurt
yeah,
when
no,
he
like
was
it's
supposed
just
to
like
be.
it's like oh like he wasn't actually that hurt, and then even when you see the big twist of like oh like yeah, guys like we did this like to try to get him to finally leave the nest. It's like he never okay like it's like the main character doesn't know that. It like doesn't
Yeah.
really matter to him. It doesn't like actually contribute to.
No.
It's just like it doesn't mean
It's
anything.
just a way for the show to make him set off on this quest,
Yeah,
which is the
and
real story.
yeah, which is the real story. And like this is kind of one of those shows where like even though it's quote unquote canonical plot driving stuff, yo, my prediction, if this show for some reason actually ends up making it to next week and we keep on watching this is the type of
Okay.
show. This is the type of show where you feel like you're watching a fucking filler episode. Like just because like just shit like happens and it like doesn't
Yeah.
matter. The characters like rarely there's like rarely any plot development that sticks. And I okay, to be fair, Fairy Tail also definitely had some of those vibes. And like I said, only through the credit of it of the manga lasting like a ridiculous amount of time do you finally start to pile up some things. But like and so like I guess it is not surprising to me that the guy who I'm pretty sure that the guy who wrote Fairy Tail was the guy who wrote this. Like
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
pretty sure like yeah.
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah,
100%.
so it's like that. I'm not surprised that this mangaka has trouble with like quote unquote like character development actually sticking and things actually really mattering per se. Like yeah,
Yeah, I think what's worse is that this is if I think we're in agreement here that this is
Yeah.
not the worst show this
Yeah,
week.
this is unfortunately
That award is honored by another show
another show.
called Combatants Will Be Dispatched. Go back to Eden Zero. Go back to Eden Zero. You'll notice in Eden Zero that we that it's tied.
yes.
For 32, we both scored it a 4. So there's a show, two other shows that also shared this score.
Yes.
Now we go to Combatants Will Be Dispatched, and it is solely the keeper of number 35 with a rolling average score of 2.75.
Yes. For Manatsu, it dropped 1.5 points from the closest one. For me, it also dropped an entire full point from the next one. Keep in mind,
Eden Zero still, in our opinions, very flame worthy, and this one was just so far down the line that
So, so this, so context: the person who wrote this is the
okay,
same person who wrote Konosuba,
okay,
and you can, I mean, you can see the
okay,
similarities in terms of the jokes that they go for, and I mean, there's a joke here, right, where he yells "explosion," and he can do
yeah,
it because he's the writer of Konosuba.
yeah.
But I didn't laugh at the jokes as much, and it felt more cringy than
Let me
anything.
put it like this: Konosuba is funny because it pokes okay, it pokes fun at tropes and animes, and it calls out the ridiculousness of it. Number one, just by the fact that it's kind of a little bit hyper done, which to be fair, a lot of hyper stuff appears in here. But the part about Konosuba that ends up making it funny is like essentially, let's say, oh, like Kazuma is an incredible pervert, blah blah. Like it ends up having a more down to earth. This is what would actually happen in real life result if you were to be this pervy. Boom, that's the actual punchline, and that's funny because it's like, oh, like here's anime ridiculousness, and this is why it's ridiculous. This one, it presents you ridiculousness and then just dwells on it. It's like, haha, like bask in its glory, and you're just like, dude, what the
Yeah,
shit?
but you
Hell
didn't,
no, like.
you didn't earn it.
Yeah, it's like you didn't. Number one, you didn't earn it, and number two, like I said, like with Konosuba, like the punchline is almost always like, let's say like, oh, like he's a super big perv, or let's say like, oh, she's super greedy or something like that. Like the
Mhm.
punchline is that like, oh, like shit won't happen the way that like typically the anime trope ends up playing out, right? And it's almost like this kind of like it's like a counter joke of like, oh, this is what would actually happen, or like here's like an alternative spin to the common trope being the result, and that's what makes it funny, right? For this one, it's
Yeah.
like I'm gonna just put it out there. Like literally, when you think of the word ecchi, like, and you go into it thinking that it's going to be an ecchi show, it ends up being even more ecchier. And like I said, it just like you're supposed to just stew in it and like
Yeah,
savor it or some shit like that. I'm just like,
and
dude, like,
that shouldn't be the crux of your joke either.
yeah, like it's like okay, like I'm not gonna lie. Okay, if you're watching something to get off, like my guy, just go go t- go watch your favorite pornographic thing and just kind of get your business done. Like this is like it's like I said, like I don't think there was any more than 2 minutes of the show's runtime that didn't get like a crazily etchy moment inserted into it with some sort of like fucking weird ass shit. Like I said, like it's so I can almost like the fact that this is the guy that wrote Konosuba makes me think that he's somewhat aware of the cringiness, but like I said, like there's just like no punchline and it's just cringe,
Yeah,
and
there
you're
isn't.
just like, dude, like Jesus, man, like what is happening? Like what
Yeah,
is
and I think it'd
happening?
be
Like
one thing if I was genuinely laughing at the jokes,
yeah,
like I just didn't find it funny.
no, like they're just not funny, right? It's like oh, there's it. Okay, like this one. Please, for the love of God, don't have this show survive into next week. And so there's a joke that he makes where he goes like, oh, like it's called what was the command for the thing, like Dick Palace or some shit like that. He goes like, oh, like
Yeah, yeah,
Dick
that was
Palace.
a
I'm just like, dude, like is this
password.
supposed to be? Yeah, like okay, like he sets a password for this AI, and he goes, haha, let's call it Dick Palace. I'm like, is this supposed to be funny or some shit like that? I'm like,
I
yeah, like
felt
it's
like
just like
more like middle school.
yeah, like it just felt like really middle school. It's like you said, it's like middle school energy where it's like, oh, dude, like the princesses with big titties, guys, like, ooh, like literally
Yeah,
princesses with big titties was like supposed to be the joke for like the first like 5 to 6 minutes of it. It was just literally princesses with big titties is like supposed to be the joke, and it's just like, okay, all right, like I
okay,
got it the first time
whatever.
around. Like, yeah, it's like okay, all right, dude, like nothing. Yeah, it's just like it's as if like let me put it like this like there are some forms of comedy where you're supposed to cringe and it's supposed to be kind of funny almost in the sense of like oh like you're supposed to look okay let me put it like this like I've read some literary analysis slash like just analysis of people saying like oh why is the office so popular, and one of the things that they
Mhm.
talked about is that like you as a person almost can like laugh down at the characters. Like it's like they're
Yeah,
doing such stupid shit that like it almost feels good to laugh down at somebody just doing something objectively way more ridiculous and stupid than you would ever do. There is not even an angle of like laughing down. Like it's just like literal cringe. It's just like, dude, what this
Yeah.
shit, man? Like stop. Like, oh my god. Like this is like okay, it's like the meme where you have like, oh, like enemies usually are normal, and the moment your mom walks in, it's like, you know, like some like just super weird
Yeah,
ass shit
really,
like that
really
meme. But like that, like the whole episode. Like,
Yeah.
dude, like I said, like man, if you trying to get your rocks off, just go type in your favorite site and just get it over with. Like, geez, don't waste 20 minutes like pretending that there's some sort of plot and having to dance around some bullshit. Like, yeah, just oof.
Yeah.
Ooh. Gotcha. The worst.
All right. So these are the 10 shows, and I just want you to stay in the slide, and the next
Okay.
slide I'll edit it. We'll flip a coin. I'll go ahead and flip a coin right now, and we'll
Okay.
take each of us will take a turn dropping a show.
Okay.
And yeah, so we'll do that first. So let me go flip a coin. Do you want to call it heads or tails?
I'll call heads.
It's heads. So you
All
have
right.
the show. So what is the first show that we're dropping from the gauntlet?
Okay. I'm gonna drop. I'm okay. I'm gaming a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna drop Eden Zero.
All right, you're dropping Eden
Yeah,
Zero.
I'm dropping Eden Zero. I do not want to watch more of that shit.
Okay, that's fair. Hold on. Let me. I'm just editing for the next slide.
Yeah.
That's the wrong one. Okay. So I'll game it back to you.
Oh, it's like
And
chicken.
I
Okay,
am
yeah.
going to drop Dragon Goes House Hunting.
Okay, all right,
Okay,
fair enough.
I'm eliminating that.
Okay.
All right, your
Wait.
turn.
Okay, so we each have 2 drops.
Yeah. So you go next again. This is your last drop. And then after this, if one of us wants to use
Yeah.
our perk drop, you can.
Alrighty. Well, on the theme of gamification, I will drop The World Ends With You animation. I just
Okay.
yeah,
The
like too
World
much
Ends With You.
migraines. Like I can't watch that shit anymore.
Okay, so you're giving me this really interesting situation. I think all the other shows has a potential to do well with the second episode. So I will
Okay.
drop Bandits Will Be
Okay,
Dispatched.
there you go. Okay.
I think the things that we kind of noted out are really different. Okay, so now
Yeah.
that we've eliminated the 4,
Okay.
do you want, since we're taking turns in this
Yeah.
order, do you want to use your additional drop?
I do not want to use it this week.
I do not as well. Do you now want to use your perk save?
No, I do not.
You sure?
I do not want to save any of these.
Yeah, me neither.
Okay.
I don't know. Combatants Will Be Dispatched is a nice save here, I think.
Holy
Yeah, I'm
shit!
not,
Yeah,
okay, I'm not gonna use my save.
yeah.
Either.
That's.
All right, so we got the first 4 shows that we're dropping,
Let's see.
and
Oh,
did it work? Yep,
let's
it did
see.
work.
Okay. Alrighty.
So this is gonna be our collage, and it'll evolve as the gauntlet goes on. But all the shows that we eliminate are all grayed out, right? So in the middle we see the Dragon, Eden Zero. Bottom there is the World Ends With You, the animation, and far right is Combatants With Dispatch. It's ordered in alphabetical order
Okay.
by Japanese titles.
Okay.
But yeah, so
Alright.
this is the first 4 drops, and so now we get to watch, instead of 35 episodes, 31 episodes.
Alrighty. Yeah. Oof. I am. Yeah. I'm gonna be very. Yeah. Yeah. That. I'm glad these shows are gone. I think that there is.
I'm glad that we decided to do 2 each.
Yeah. Yeah. That is. Oof. There is. Originally, like what Minatsu mentioned at the very beginning, originally we actually had, if I recall correctly, a lower drop count. Was it a lower drop count?
We were deciding between dropping 1 each,
Yeah.
or giving all shows a shot for the first 3 weeks, eliminating none, and then eliminating 6
Yeah.
total at week 3.
Yeah.
But
And so
I like this version much
Yeah.
better.
because I'm not gonna lie, like there's some stuff that like where I'm just like there's just no room for it to go up, and I think that yeah, I mean these shows are just oof, like it would be torture to watch more. So
Yeah. So we'll keep the same format for next week. We'll eliminate another 4. Again, we'll be looking at the rolling averages. So the scores for this week do count for next week
yes,
to determine who the bottom 8 or bottom 10 are.
yes, yeah, and so exactly like I think
And for those of you who are wondering, like, oh, like, what if it gets, like, really amazing, like, later on? Like, that's specifically why we have, like, a peak moment as kind of like as a calculator. Like, it's essentially kind of helps you boost. Let's say, like, oh, like, first episode is absolutely, resident sleeper, but then the next episode is like, oh, shit, that's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
theoretically, that part of our scale should salvage it from essentially just like cratering itself completely. Like, AK, like if at some point the thing does really well, it literally gets a point of a, like
Point,
potentially
yeah.
up to a
I
point.
mean,
of a
also at
boost,
the
and
end,
so,
we're the ones eliminating the show, so we
Yeah.
think it's good. It's like we're not gonna eliminate.
yeah,
it.
we're not gonna eliminate it, but yeah. I will say, overall, I will admit that this is the first time I've actually put this much of a conscious effort into watching everything that came out
Yeah,
in a season. Yeah, like in like a like a anime season. Previously before it was more just like, oh, picking up like what I think would be good, and
Yeah.
then kind of just potentially rolling with that. That being said, though, it seemed like the distribution wasn't too bad. I think that there was a lot of shows where, like, even if it wasn't like particularly amazing, there was still potential for it. And I will say that I am a little bit surprised that there are two shows or like three shows that come out of this where I'm just like, damn, this is really solid. I think, like, this
Yeah.
is actually like an anime that I would really want to watch. So yeah, for those of you who may not have even watched any of this and are thinking of potentially watching some, those Snow White notes, Vivi, Florid's Eye Song, and 86 are all ones that I would just like say, like, like, oh, like, this is genuinely has a potential of being like a good show, like, even if you were to
Yeah.
take it outside of like the 2021 Spring Gauntlet. And so yeah, those three would be the ones that I would recommend just based off of the first episode. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see where this goes, cause it was an easier round to drop.
Yeah.
But obviously every week it's gonna be really really difficult, cause we're gonna eventually get rid of good shows.
Yes. There will
So
be a point in which, like, let's say, like, even by like week like 4 or something like that, like some of these shows that we deemed were yellow
be in
and
the
like not
pack.
bad, yeah, like used to be in the middle of the pack, now we're gonna have to try to eliminate. I think that, for this week, like, the juiciness of it just came from, my colorful flaming of the shows. But in the future, I'm expecting in the future episodes, just, kind of arguing for or against shows. There should also be some interesting dialogue that comes out of that when the shows aren't just literally so objectively bad that both of us go, yeah, no, we're not going to use saves, we're not going to use X, we're not going to use any saves, like, just unanimous agreement, just be like, it's done, and just
Yeah. So if you go to next slide, we'll just show the
Okay.
format more if people are tuning in later. So we're done with week 1. We're watching 31 shows for week 2, dropping 4 again. So for week 3, we'll have 27 shows, and then at that point, we'll just be dropping 2 at a time and adding Yasuke as well. The numbers will be a little bit different because if the Way of the House Husband, we do end up keeping that
yes.
show for a lot of times, we'll be dropping one more show since it's only 5 episodes long.
Yeah.
And in terms of perks remaining, we have all our perks left.
Yeah,
So.
we still have all the perks.
Yeah, I think that is it.
Alrighty. Thanks for tuning in to the first proper week of the show. Follow our Twitch channel. Hopefully in the future, we ran into some issues with YouTube's copyright bots for our very first one because we were watching a big bunch of trailers in it. But these podcasts now in the future should be uploaded to YouTube, and so you can also watch it there. If you do want to take a particular influencing aspect to the show outside of, like a nice little animation showing up on screen for like a Twitch follower or something like that, you can head to our Patreon, and there are some donations, and there's some extra perks that you can get for supporting the show.
I think that's it.
Alrighty, sounds good. We will see you all next week. Hope you all have as good of a time as you can have during this COVID world. Fill your life with anime in the meantime. Let us. We'll be more than happy to listen to your opinions about it. We also have a Discord community that you can join, and if you guys have feedbacks or you guys have some reactions that you also want to share with us, might as well just get
get your fill of anime, and we can either be in slack jaw amazement at some shows or just band together and just laugh at some stupidity like no ridiculousness. So yeah, all right, thanks for watching, and we will see you on next week at the same time. Alrighty, peace.
Peace.